Welcome to MysteryCon. Before we start, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe and let me know from where you are watching. Thanks. The forest didn't scream the first night. We did. We were 6 days upriver, deeper into the Amazon than any of us had planned to go, when the trees started making noise. At first, it was easy to rationalize. Our acoustic sensors picked up strange resonances after dusk, long drawn-out wails that sounded almost mechanical, like something moaning through layers of damp wood. I was the lead linguistics analyst on the expedition, mostly brought in to catalogue oral histories from nearby tribes. I wasn't trained for the raw, biological strangeness we started encountering. We thought it was the wind. We told ourselves it had to be animals. Maybe howler monkeys, or some overlapping echolocation gone wrong. But by the third night, the screams came in chorus. That's when Hector, our audio engineer, looped a segment and slowed it down. There were words, fragmented, unintelligible syllables that didn't match any known local language. My stomach sank when I heard them again, in real time the following night, this time layered beneath the shrieks like a whispering chant. The forest didn't want us there, that much was clear. One of the guides refused to continue. He said, forest was reawakening. We laughed it off then. Not because it was funny, but because it was easier than admitting we believed him. The trees, massive cebas with roots like rib cages, stood too still during the day, as if listening. Their bark bled when cut. And always at night, they screamed. I started to dream of mouths in bark, eyes in canopy, words etched in root systems. I kept those dreams to myself. On the 5th night, we buried a dead drone just to shut it up. It wouldn't stop recording, kept pinging the same corrupted clip over and over. A looped cry, followed by what sounded like a warning. Run! That was the first time I felt real fear. Not curiosity, not scientific thrill, just something primal, like I'd wandered into a church meant for the dead. The expedition lead suggested we withdraw, but the elder we'd met upriver sent a message. Instead, they're not screaming, they're trying to save you. I couldn't sleep after that. The elder's message haunted us more than the screams. We didn't leave, not because we were brave, but because we couldn't agree on what to believe. Some thought the trees were mimicking sounds they'd absorbed over centuries, like an organic recorder warped by time. Others believed the forest was projecting something, some form of collective memory or warning. I kept listening to the recordings. Every night they changed. The screams remained constant, but the whispers shifted. Once I heard a phrase in Latin. Another night, something closer to Old Norse. Each time, it felt like the voice was getting clearer. Hector set up directional mics along a 2-kilometer arc around the camp. That night, the screams formed a perfect circle, timed to erupt every 34 seconds, as if choreographed. We weren't imagining it. The forest had rhythm. We started marking the trees where the sounds were strongest. That's when we noticed something else. Each marked tree had deep grooves in its trunk. Not natural scars, but precise carvings, spirals, interlocked triangles, and what looked like glyphs that resembled early proto-writing systems. None of them were recent. The bark had healed over in places, but the patterns remained. One tree had a human tooth embedded in the bark. Hector found it by accident while scraping for a sample. When he pulled it out, the screaming stopped for 7 seconds. Then it resumed, louder and closer. That was the first night we armed ourselves, not against animals, but against the sense that something had noticed us. Our guide, Lucas, refused to sleep inside the camp. He said the ground was tainted. I asked what he meant, and he just muttered, "You don't build on bones." We followed him the next morning. 50 meters beyond the last tree, the soil changed color, grey, compacted, and laced with shards of pottery and rusted metal. There were no stones, no wildlife, not even insects. Just that awful, dead quiet. Lucas pointed to the base of a tree and said, "This is where they were buried." He didn't say who. I didn't ask. But later, when I pressed him alone, he gave me a name. Not a person's name, but a place. Quiebramas, he said. It means the place that never forgets. Lucas wouldn't go near the burial ground again. He said we were free to stay, but he'd already warned us, and he wouldn't be responsible. That evening, he packed a small satchel and left without a sound. We didn't try to stop him. Part of me wanted to follow, but instead we moved the camp uphill, away from the grey soil. It didn't help. That night, the screams were louder than ever, closer, sharper, almost pleading. Hector snapped at me around midnight, accused me of editing the recordings to scare the team. I didn't answer. I was too focused on what I'd heard just minutes before. In one segment, layered beneath the screams, a clear phrase had emerged in Old Spanish. "Vuelvan a celar la tierra." Seal the ground again. I didn't sleep. The next morning we found our tents covered in a fine black dust. Not ash, not mold, something different. It clung to the fabric and made our gear smell metallic. 3 of our trail cameras had been ripped from the trees, their straps torn clean through. One was buried halfway in the mud, lens cracked, still, blinking red. We reviewed its footage in silence. It showed nothing unusual until 2:37 a.m. Then everything went black for 8 seconds. When the image returned, the camera was on the ground, tilted up at a tree. In that frame, we saw something I still can't explain. The tree's bark had shifted. Not moved, shifted. As if it had breathed. The grooves in its trunk pulsed slightly, the same rhythm as the screams. Hector said it was impossible. Our botanist said nothing at all. She just stood up, walked into the forest, and didn't come back for over 3 hours. When she returned, she was barefoot and trembling. Her boots were gone. She wouldn't tell us what happened, just sat near the fire and stared at the trees like she was seeing them for the first time. That night, I listened to the recording again, frame by frame. In the final few seconds before the footage cut out, a voice, human, low, broken, said just 3 words in perfect English. "It's not enough." The 4th night broke something in all of us. We didn't speak much after dinner. No one wanted to name what we were hearing, what we were seeing. Even the wind felt wrong, as if the forest itself had stopped to listen. At 11:12 p.m., the screaming shifted. The sounds grew softer, but more coherent. Words overlapped in dozens of voices, repeating different phrases in perfect synchronization. Not chants, not songs, warnings, commands. Hector isolated several audio strands and looped them one at a time. Most were in dead or extinct languages. One matched an Aztec dialect used in pre-contact rituals. Another resembled Phoenician. Each voice repeated a variation of the same idea: the ground remembers. At 2:03 a.m. the screams stopped altogether. The silence was worse. It was complete. No insects, no breeze, not even the soft crackle of our dying fire. That's when we heard the knocking. It came from 3 different directions, rhythmic and steady. Not footsteps, not animals. It was wood on wood, like branches tapping in a deliberate sequence. Then we saw the lights. Faint, pale glows in the canopy, moving slowly, one by one, like lanterns drifting between the trees. No one moved. Even our biologist, still barefoot, just curled into herself, rocking slightly, whispering something I couldn't make out. I pulled out the field journal and began writing, not out of habit, but out of panic. I needed to anchor myself in something real. That's when I remembered the elder's words. They're not screaming, they're trying to save you. The pieces didn't fit until I flipped back to our earliest notes. 10 years ago, another expedition had passed through this region. They vanished without a trace. No bodies, no gear, nothing. Only a burned-out campsite and the same black dust. I hadn't connected the location until now. The coordinates matched exactly. The forest wasn't haunted, it was trying to contain something, and we had disturbed it again. The final audio Hector extracted, recorded seconds before the screams went silent, chilled me more than anything else. It was a child's voice, whispering, asking one question over and over. Will it be you? By morning the lights were gone, but the air still held their weight. It was thick, oppressive, like walking through warm stone. None of us spoke over breakfast. We just chewed in silence, eyes scanning the trees as if waiting for something to move. Hector packed the audio gear without saying a word. Our biologist, her name was Sophia, refused to wear shoes. She said the ground felt wrong beneath them, like it rejected the barrier. I didn't argue. I was too busy tracing the carvings we'd documented earlier. One spiral matched a symbol from a 16th century missionary journal, a sketch believed to mark locations where human sacrifices had been performed. That journal had described a forest in which the trees could speak. No one believed it. Until now. At midday, we followed the path the lights had taken. It led north, deeper into terrain our maps didn't cover. After 2 hours, we reached a clearing filled with rows of trees perfectly spaced, unnatural in their symmetry. Each trunk bore the same carving, 3 vertical lines crossing a horizontal bar, like a crude tally. 47 trees in total. Sophia said nothing until she reached the center. Then she dropped to her knees and whispered, "This is it." We stood there, not knowing what it meant. She pointed to a mound of earth shaped like a shallow dome. At its center was a single stone, flat, polished, and stained dark along the edges. There were no bones, no tools, nothing else. But the forest grew completely silent around it. Even the wind stopped. I stepped forward, careful not to touch the stone. The air grew colder, just slightly. Then the knocking started again, 4 beats, then silence. 4 beats, then silence. We turned to leave, but Sophia remained where she was. Her voice was quiet, but clear. 1 every 10 years, she said. That's the cost. Hector froze mid-step. What cost? I asked. She looked up at me, calm, almost peaceful. To keep the forest quiet. None of us spoke. None of us moved. I glanced around at the carved trees, at the black dust forming again on the leaves, and understood. The screams weren't a threat. They were a warning. And now the forest was waiting. We didn't speak on the way back. The forest seemed to press in around us, as if listening to our silence. Hector walked ahead, gear slung over his shoulder, eyes locked straight ahead. Sophia stayed behind me, barefoot and steady, humming something under her breath. I couldn't place the melody. It wasn't familiar. It wasn't comforting. By the time we returned to camp, the black dust had thickened. It coated our tents, the tools, even the food. The electronics were failing, one by one. The satellite phone clicked uselessly. The GPS flickered, unable to find a signal. We were on our own. Hector tried to keep things moving. He insisted we break camp at first light and head west toward the nearest river fork, but Sophia refused. She stood by the edge of the burial ground and said we wouldn't make it. Not without someone staying behind. I asked her how she knew. She just said, "It's always been this way." That night, we burned our notes, the recordings, the journals, even the samples. We destroyed everything, not out of fear, but out of obligation. We'd seen too much, heard too much, and none of it should leave this place. I watched the pages curl and blacken in the fire, wondering what good it would do. At midnight, the forest screamed again, but it was different. Slower, more mournful, like a memory dissolving. Then came the whisper, soft and singular, in a voice that sounded like mine. "It's time." Sophia stood and walked toward the clearing. We didn't stop her. I don't know if we were frozen or if we simply understood. She never looked back. The trees opened slightly, forming a narrow path we hadn't seen before. She stepped inside, and the forest swallowed her whole. The knocking stopped. The dust fell, and then, for the first time in weeks, silence. Complete, still, final. Hector broke down. I didn't. I just packed what little we had left and waited for sunrise. When it came, the forest looked the same. But it felt different. Quieter. Watching, we left without speaking. The forest had made its choice. 1 every 10 years. And now it had 10 more. We reached the river 2 days later. The silence held the entire way, not just in the forest, but between us. Even the usual chatter of birds and insects didn't return. Only when the current came into view did the world feel normal again. The sound of moving water was almost jarring. Hector didn't say much. He looked thinner, like something had been carved out of him back in the clearing. I felt the same. We flagged a cargo boat headed downriver and paid in equipment. The crew didn't ask questions. They never do. Back in the city, we filed a partial report, missing details, broken equipment, lost time. We said nothing about Sophia. We left her name off the documents, off the records, off the world. It wasn't a mission, it was protection. A month passed. Then, too, I tried to return to work. I tried to sleep. Neither stuck. I kept hearing her voice in my dreams. Not calling for help, reassuring, steady, always the same phrase. You were spared. One night I checked the date. 10 years to the day since the last expedition vanished. The timeline fit too perfectly to be chance. I reviewed the archives off the record. Every 10 years, within a 6-day margin, someone had gone missing in that region. Explorers, loggers, sometimes entire crews, always absorbed, never found.
I called Hector. He answered, but he didn't say anything. I could hear the forest behind him. He'd gone back. I knew better than to ask why. Some debts don't feel paid even when they are.
I keep our final recordings stored on a separate drive, hidden, unmarked. I don't listen to it anymore, but I remember the last frame. The waveform had flattened, but just before it cut out there was a single tone. High, clean, unmistakable.
A heartbeat. Not ours. Not human. Something old, something patient. The forest has time, and in 10 years it will call again. Whether we answer or not doesn't matter. It will find someone. It always does.
We thought it was a panther until it called my name from 30 feet above us. That's what made Ricky freeze, rifle half raised, his breath stuck in his chest like a swallowed stone. I remember the sound perfectly. It wasn't just my voice, it was me. The exact way I yell when I'm out of breath, the way I sound when I'm nervous, but trying not to show it. It came from up in the canopy, just beyond the tree line, where the green, glowing eyes had first blinked into view. I spotted them 5 nights ago on the trail cam, 2 spheres of neon jade, locked together like a pair of surgical lights, floating too high for any mountain lion. We thought maybe it was a trick of the infrared. But then the cam went dead, and the lens cracked. That's why we came out here tonight, 4 of us, packed light, ready to track whatever it was. I wasn't scared at first, mostly curious. There was something off about this part of the woods, sure. But hunters say that about anywhere they don't understand. It was Ricky who firstly noticed it mimicking. We'd split up for a half hour. When he came back, he swore I'd called for him twice, loud and panicked. Only problem was I hadn't said a word. By the time the sun dipped low, we'd all heard it. Sometimes it mimicked animals, sometimes people, but always wrong. The pitch just a shade too smooth, the cadence almost human. And the deeper into the forest we went, the more it learned. It used full sentences now, bits of our conversations, things no one else would have known. Ricky swore it asked about his daughter, asked in his dead brother's voice. By midnight, the canopy eyes appeared again, higher this time, moving slow from branch to branch, never making a sound. The wind died, even the bugs stopped. And then, from 30 feet above, Caleb.
Don't run. My name, my voice. That's when Ricky bolted, and I should have too. I didn't chase after Ricky. I just stood there, listening to the sound of his boots crashing through the underbrush until it vanished into silence. The thing didn't
follow him. It stayed above me, still as stone. I could feel its gaze, those green orbs fixed on my face like it was studying me. My fingers gripped the stock of my rifle tighter, but I didn't raise it. I knew better. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I could scare off with noise. The air was cold, heavier than it should have been for early fall. I called out, softly, half hoping it would answer. "Who are you?" No reply. Just the whisper of leaves shifting overhead. I took a step back, slow and careful. Another. Then it spoke again, my voice, but warped now. Lower. "Caleb, you left him." I froze. It wasn't just mimicry anymore. It understood what had just happened. It watched us. I swallowed hard, heart pounding against my ribs. "What do you want?" Silence again. Then a sound I can only describe as laughter, but hollow, like a bad recording. I clicked on my thermal scope, hands trembling, and scanned the trees. At first, there was nothing, just blue and purple shapes of branches and cold bark. Then, for a brief second, something flickered, a heat signature, narrow and coiled like a human spine, but stretched, long, unnatural. It vanished as quickly as it came. My breath caught. I backed away, eyes still locked on the canopy, stepping lightly to avoid snapping branches underfoot. I didn't know if Ricky had made it out, but I knew I wouldn't if I stayed much longer. Still, even as I turned to go, I could feel it moving with me, unseen but close. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of that thermal flicker just ahead or just behind. It wasn't chasing. It was herding me, leading me deeper. That's when I realized something else. My GPS had gone dead. The screen blinked, then turned black. No signal, no direction, just me, the woods, and whatever was following me from the trees. The deeper I moved, the quieter the forest became. It wasn't just the usual nighttime stillness. This was absolute. No insects, no birds, not even the wind. Just the sound of my boots pressing into damp earth and the low hum of my breathing. I kept the thermal scope raised, scanning side to side. Every few minutes the heat signature reappeared, always brief, always moving. It stayed high in the trees, shifting from branch to branch with a smooth, predatory grace. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. I started to recognize landmarks I shouldn't have seen from this direction. A crooked pine, a collapsed hunting blind, even one of our trail markers. But they were in the wrong places, twisted into a layout that didn't match the real map. That's when I realized the forest had changed. Not just my path, everything. The trees were wrong, older, denser. I'd hiked these woods for over 10 years, and I had never seen this part before. That's when the voices returned. Not just mine this time. First, it was my dad's voice, calling from behind, calm, familiar. He died 3 years ago. Then it was Rachel, my sister, repeating something she used to say when we were kids. "Come find me, Caleb." The words floated through the trees, distant and clear. I stopped walking. My hands shook, the barrel of the rifle dipping slightly. I knew it wasn't real. It was playing with me, testing what made me stop, what made me listen. And then somehow it got it right. From somewhere just ahead, I heard my mother's voice, broken, soft, just like it was the day she forgot my name in the hospital. "Do you remember me?" I dropped to a knee, head spinning. This wasn't mimicry. This was personal. It had reached into memories I hadn't touched in years. I don't know how long I stayed crouched there, trying to push the voices out. When I finally looked up through the scope again, the thermal outline was back, closer now, hanging low in the branches, watching, waiting. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew now that it could see more than just where I was. It could see who I was. I kept moving, but I didn't run. Running felt pointless. It wanted me to go somewhere, and sprinting would only make me miss whatever clues it was leaving behind. The trees looked older now, their trunks wider, bark gnarled like twisted rope. I passed a fallen log that had been hollowed out and charred from the inside. No sign of a fire around it, just the blackened wood and a faint scent of something burnt long ago. I stayed alert, thermal scope steady. The signature had vanished again. Still I felt its presence. I started seeing things scattered along the path. A torn glove, Ricky's. The kind he used for bow season. Nearby, a boot print in the mud, deep and uneven, like someone had stumbled. I followed it until the trail ended at a clearing. The ground here was different, soft, like something had been recently disturbed. I crouched, brushed the top layer of leaves aside. Underneath was bare soil, fresh and damp. Then I saw it, a handheld radio, half buried. Ours. I turned it on, dead. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach knot. There was blood on the antenna. Not much. Just enough to be noticed. I scanned the area with the scope. Nothing. But I could feel the shift, like the air had changed weight. I turned in a slow circle. That's when the laughter returned. This time it was my voice, laughing the way I do when I'm nervous, pretending I'm fine. But it was wrong, echoing from above and all around. It broke off mid-chuckle and shifted into something else. Crying, low and choked. The same sound Rachel made the night our dad died. I dropped the scope. My head felt like it was splitting open. It wasn't just replaying memories, it was pulling them from me, ripping them out. The longer I stayed, the more it seemed to know. That's when I understood. It didn't kill to eat, it hunted thoughts. It learned from fear. And if I didn't leave soon, there wouldn't be anything left of me for it to learn from. Or remember, I forced myself to move, putting distance between me and that clearing. My thoughts felt slower now, like something was tugging at them. I tried to focus on physical things, footsteps, the weight of the rifle, the rhythm of my breathing, but even those felt dim, like I was watching myself from far away. I avoided the trail and cut east using landmarks I thought I still recognized. My compass was useless. The needle spun in lazy circles, no fixed direction. After 20 minutes of walking, I came across something that stopped me cold. A hunting stand, old and rusted, half swallowed by vines. We hadn't built it. Nobody I knew had. But someone had been there recently. A crushed water bottle, a torn scrap of cloth, and a small notebook with its cover soaked through. I opened it carefully. The pages were warped but legible. The first entry was short. It only shows up on thermal. Don't speak. Don't listen. The next few pages were sketches, eyes always high in the trees. One showed a person curled up in a hollow, eyes wide, hands over their ears. Then a final note, scrawled in a shaky hand. If it starts to sound like someone you know, it's already inside. I dropped the notebook and stepped back. My hands were trembling again. I raised the thermal scope. Still nothing. No heat, no movement. But then, faintly, from behind me, I heard my own voice. It was whispering, just above a breath. "Don't turn around." I froze. My body locked in place. I held my breath, straining to hear if it would say anything else. Silence. Then again, louder this time, still in my exact voice. "If you see it, you lose everything." I didn't turn, I just walked forward, slow and steady. The forest around me started to shimmer. Not light, just the edges of things. Trees, ground, even the air looked wrong, like static on an old TV. I felt a cold pressure behind my eyes, as if something was crawling just beneath my skull. The notebook had been right. It didn't just mimic, it entered, it burrowed. And it was already working its way into my mind. I didn't answer the voice. I couldn't. It was soft, playful, exactly how my niece used to sound before the accident. But she'd been gone for years. That made it worse. I stepped back into the hallway, rifle raised, the folder clutched in my other hand. My thoughts were fraying again. I forced myself to focus on the layout, concrete, rusted pipes, flickering overhead lights, still holding on with a faint hum. Somewhere above me I heard a door creak. The mimic was moving. Slowly. Patiently. It didn't need to rush. It already had what it wanted. I started back up the stairs. With every step, my memories grew hazier, faces blurred, places dissolved. Even my own name felt slippery. When I reached the ground floor, the building seemed darker. The ceiling dripped, the hallway pulsed with faint heat, brief flashes on the thermal scope that vanished before I could center them. I turned toward the exit, but the door was gone. Not blocked, gone. Just a smooth wall where it had been. I spun, heart racing. Every window had vanished too. The building was folding in on itself, changing shape. I looked down at the folder, my last piece of proof, and realized I didn't remember why it mattered. I opened it. The pages were blank. Everyone. I dropped it, took a step back, and nearly fell as the floor cracked beneath me. I caught myself against the wall, breathing hard, the air now thick like water. Then the laughter returned, not mine, not anyone I knew, just wrong. It circled me, bouncing off the concrete. I pointed the rifle at the ceiling, scanned for heat. There, just above. Brief, a flicker, and I fired. The crack of the shot echoed forever. I turned slowly. It wasn't dead, just visible now, twisted, tall, human-shaped but stretched like melted wire. Its face shimmered, no features, just movement, like static underwater. Behind it, part of the wall cracked open. Inside was another room, dust-covered, lined with monitors and sealed crates. On one wall, a metal plaque, tarnished, but still
legible. Depth of Human Engineering, Auditory Cognition Division. I stepped closer. There were cages, scratched from the inside, files taped to clipboards hung on rusted hooks. One sheet remained intact. It listed exposure durations, how
long before subjects stopped resisting, stopped speaking, stopped recalling their own names. I read the last line twice. Phase 4, memory extraction complete. Subject unresponsive but alive. I backed away. That was the test. Not if it could kill, if it could leave you hollow. Behind me, something whispered again. Not my voice.
Not my niece. A new voice now, one I'd never heard before. Ready for the next one? I didn't run. I walked, my boots pressed softly into the dirt as I stepped through the cracked wall and out into the night.
Moonlight filtered through the trees, cool and quiet. I followed it. Not because I trusted where it led, but because I had nothing else to follow. My mind was unraveling, not fast, just enough that I could feel the shape of what I was losing. At first, it was names, of streets, of friends. Then it was places, conversations, dates. I tried to focus on details I could still hold, the rifle in my hand, the sting of cold air, the faint rhythm of my steps. They kept me grounded barely. My thermal scope pulsed in short, irregular bursts. The mimic wasn't behind me now. It was inside the trees, pacing alongside, flickering through gaps in the canopy like a reflection that didn't belong. I reached a ridge where the forest opened up. Below was the clearing we'd first entered from. I saw our camp, or what was left of it. Tents torn open, gear scattered, no sign of Ricky. Just a trail of disturbed leaves heading into the brush. I stood there, listening. No voices, not yet, but the silence held weight like the pause before a scream. Then, in front of me, the mimic emerged, not stealthy anymore. It stepped through the trees, fully visible, tall, arched, limbs like rope and sinew. Its face was blank, but still moving, fluid, like glass over running water. No mimicry, no sound, just presence. It tilted its head and spoke, not with stolen words, but its own. A voice like static, tuned into something just close enough to humans. We remember what you forget. I didn't answer. I couldn't. It stepped aside, behind.
The path opened again. No tricks, no shifting walls.
Just forest. Normal, familiar. I walked past it without looking back. And as I crossed into the clearing, I felt lighter. Not better, just emptier. I knew I was leaving with less than I came with. Maybe pieces I wouldn't notice missing for weeks, maybe ones I'd never get back, but I made it out. And in this kind of story, that's the best ending you can hope for. They only hunt the ones who believe they're real. So when I published that first field report, I signed my own death sentence. That's what I keep thinking, as the howls rise through the trees again. Long, wet shrieks that don't sound like anything with lungs should be able to make. I'm camped on the outer edge of the Tambakiro Reserve, a 10-mile radius of jungle no one visits unless they're lost, desperate, or, in my case, recklessly obsessed. My name is Dr. Camila Rojas. I'm a field biologist with a specialization in cryptogenetic anomalies, a title that sounds more impressive than it pays. I came here to study jaguar migratory behavior. That's what my grant says. But the truth is, I came for the howlers, not the monkeys, though they're out here too, but the things that walk like men, scream like predators, and leave no trace except the sound of raw pain echoing through the dry season nights. Locals call them los desollados, the skinless
ones. The first time I heard about them, I thought it was just another ghost story. But then I found the glyph, a spiral sun carved into the cave wall behind the old colonial church ruins, paired with a set of lunar markings that matched the
current moon phase. I took samples, photographed the surrounding sediment. That night, the screaming started, not distant, not vague, right outside my tent. I didn't sleep, couldn't. At dawn I found prints in the soil, barefoot, human-shaped, but wrong. The toes were stretched, almost paw-like. The heel was missing, and the soil was soaked in something that didn't quite look like blood. I should have left then, filed a strange occurrence report, packed up my gear, and called it a loss. But I didn't. Because when I radioed the nearby ranger station, the line went dead mid-sentence. And when I retraced my steps back to the cave, I found something new scratched into the stone below the glyph. It was my name. The sun hadn't cleared the canopy when I packed up camp and made my way back to the cave. I kept my machete in hand, not because I expected to use it, more for the illusion of safety. The jungle was different now, not louder or quieter, just aware. Every leaf, every shadow felt like it was watching. I moved fast, eyes scanning for anything out of place. When I reached the cave entrance, the glyph was still there, sun spiral, lunar notches, but the scratches below, it were gone. My name had been etched into the stone just yesterday. Now nothing but clean rock, as if it had never been touched. I took new photos and rubbed my fingers along the surface. No grooves, no residue, just smooth, dry limestone. I stepped inside. The air grew colder as I descended, my boots echoing off the stone walls. Bats stirred overhead, wings brushing against the ceiling in soft, leathery flutters. Deeper in, I found the altar. A crude slab ringed with symbols I couldn't place, circles, interlocking lines, and shapes that almost looked like anatomical diagrams. Next to it, an animal skull rested on a bed of feathers and ash. I crouched to examine it. Not a monkey, not any known predator, something in between.
elongated jaw, canine incisors, but human eye sockets. I reached for my camera, then froze. Something had moved behind me, just a flicker, a shadow along the wall that didn't belong. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw only the dark curve of the tunnel.
Still, I backed away, keeping my eyes on the path. I didn't run. Not until I was outside, standing in full daylight. I radioed the ranger station again. No response. The signal light blinked red. I checked my GPS. No connection. That night, I relocated camp a mile east, near a dry creek bed. I built a fire and sat with my recorder, documenting everything. Then I heard it again. The howl. Closer now. Sharper. Not like the night before. This one carried weight, like it knew where I was, like it wasn't just calling out into the forest. It was answering me. I didn't sleep. Not really. Just drifted in and out, jolting awake every time the fire cracked too loud or the wind shifted wrong. Around 2 a.m., I heard branches snapping in the tree line. slow, intentional. Something was moving, big enough to break deadwood, quiet enough to mean it didn't want to be seen. I stayed still, knife in hand, eyes locked on the dark beyond the firelight. Nothing came through, not that night. But the next morning, I found new tracks along the creek bed, same misshapen print, barefoot, with long narrow toes. A second set trailed behind it, smaller. I followed them for half a mile until they vanished into a patch of mossy stone. No drag marks, no scuffing, just clean rock, like they'd been lifted out. I went back to camp and started reviewing audio from the night before. The howls were clearer this time, longer, layered with something beneath them, like whispering. Not language, just breath, patterns. I scrubbed through the files and found a moment where the howl cut short, replaced by a low, wet, clicking sound. I isolated it and played it back.
Over and over, it reminded me of the throat noises primates make during stress displays, but slower, more rhythmic. I sent the file through a waveform analyzer.
The readout caught something strange, intermittent gaps in the waveform, like the sound wasn't just playing, but reacting. The software flagged it as anomalous interference. The pattern aligned perfectly with my spoken notes. The clicks happened right after I mentioned the glyph. I shut the laptop and backed away. That night I built no fire. I wrapped myself in the tarp and lay in silence. No recording, no flashlight, just stillness. But the howling returned anyway, closer, and this
time, it stopped halfway through, as if it realized I wasn't afraid anymore.
Then I heard breathing just outside the tarp, deep, measured, and something soft dragging across the ground like wet skin against leaves. I didn't move, I didn't speak, and when it finally stepped away, I realized something worse than fear. It had been listening, not just to me, but for me. At dawn, I forced myself to move. My joints ached from the cold, and every breath felt heavier than it should have. I checked the perimeter. Nothing left behind. No prints, no broken branches. Whatever it was had stayed just long enough to make its presence known. I packed quickly and hiked east toward the cave again. I needed answers, more than speculation and audio files. I followed the stream bed until I reached a clearing I'd passed before. But now, something new caught my eye. A stone marker. Square, weathered, partially buried. It wasn't natural. I cleared the moss and found a carving on its surface. The same spiral sun from the cave, but surrounded by smaller symbols, stick figures twisted into contorted shapes, arms raised, as if in pain or prayer. I photographed everything, then dug around the base of the marker with my hands. A sealed container lay beneath, metal, rusted shut, wrapped in vines. I pried it open and pulled out what looked like a journal. The cover was stiff, leather stretched, tight, stained, dark. Inside, the pages were brittle and handwritten in Spanish. The entries were dated 1891. I skimmed the first few. A missionary had arrived to bring light to a native village hidden deep in the jungle. He wrote of kindness at first, rituals, offerings, a lunar calendar scratched into stone. But the tone shifted quickly. He described nights filled with screaming and red figures moving through the trees, people vanished, entire families gone without struggle. The villagers spoke of a curse placed generations before, a punishment for betrayal. Each dry season it returned, and only those who spoke of it were taken. The final entry was scrawled, almost illegible. They listened when I prayed. Now they speak back. My skin burns when they call. I closed the book and sat there for
a long time. This wasn't legend. It was memory, passed down, erased, then rediscovered.
I wasn't the first outsider to dig too deep. I wouldn't be the last. I wrapped the journal and slipped it into my pack. As I stood, the trees behind me shifted. No sound, just movement. I didn't turn around. I already knew what I'd see, or worse, who. I didn't run. Running invites pursuit. Instead, I walked. Slow, steady, careful not to show fear. The feeling behind me didn't fade. It tracked me through the trees, staying just out of sight, just quiet enough that I couldn't be sure it was real. I followed the path back to the cave, not because it was safer, but because it was the only place I hadn't been attacked. If the glyph was a warning or a boundary, maybe it still held some weight. The entrance looked unchanged, but the air inside felt different, thicker, warmer, almost humid. I lit my headlamp and stepped inside. The altar was still there. The skull, the symbols, but this time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A strip of dark fabric pinned beneath one of the stones. I pulled it free. It wasn't old. Synthetic weave, modern stitching, a piece of a shirt. I checked the hem, university seal. I knew the logo. It was from the same department I worked for. I went cold. Another biologist must have come before me. But no one had mentioned it. No published papers, no field reports. I turned back toward the altar. Behind it, barely visible against the cave wall, was a narrow passage, low and curved, like something had been crawling through for years. I crouched and followed it. 20 feet in, the tunnel widened into a chamber. Bones lined the walls, stacked with care, arranged into patterns. Human. Animal. Some I didn't
recognize. In the center stood a circular pit, no wider than a manhole, with steps spiraling down into darkness. I stayed at the edge, listening. No wind, no echoes, just silence thick enough to choke on. I knew I should leave, seal the cave, forget everything. But then I saw the carvings around the rim, names, dozens of them, etched by hand, clean and deep. Mine was there too, the same shaky lines I'd seen scratched below the glyph. Except
this time I hadn't carved it, and it was already starting to fade, like the stone was swallowing it whole. I backed away from the pit slowly, careful not to touch the carved names. My name was still there, barely, but already softening at the edges like it was being erased from memory itself. I didn't understand how or why, but I no longer doubted what I was dealing with. This wasn't superstition. This was control, ancient, precise, and deeply tied to the land. I climbed back through the tunnel and stood once more in the open cave. The air was cooler now, almost cold. I looked at the altar again. On impulse, I lifted the skull and checked underneath. A small stone tablet lay hidden there, carved with more glyphs, sun spirals, crescent moons. and a shape I hadn't seen before. A ring of jagged lines forming a circle around a single, downward-pointing figure. I didn't recognize the symbol, but the pattern reminded me of the audio waveform, the same intervals, the same rhythm. I took photos, then gently placed everything back as I found it. I didn't want to disturb whatever system was in place. Outside, the sky had darkened with storm clouds, unusual for the dry season. The pressure dropped sharply. Thunder rolled in the distance. I returned to camp, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. My tent had collapsed. The stakes had been pulled from the ground, laid in a neat row beside it. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged, just rearranged. A message. I rebuilt it anyway. At dusk I recorded my thoughts. My voice sounded thin and strained. I kept checking the tree line. The howls returned just after nightfall. Not one this time, 3, all from different directions. I muted the recorder and listened. Each call was followed by silence, then the clicks again, longer now, clearer, like language, but stripped down to its bones. I stared into the trees, heart pounding, and saw the glow of something wet and red just beyond the first row of branches. It moved slowly, too tall for a man, too smooth to be anything natural. I didn't breathe. It didn't advance. I just watched. And then slowly, it opened its mouth, not to roar or scream, but to mimic my own voice, repeating the last word I had spoken into the recorder. Believe. It said the word once, soft and distorted, like it was forcing sound through a throat that wasn't meant to speak. Then it vanished. No footsteps, no rustling, just gone. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, unable to move or think. When I finally looked at the recorder, the red light was still blinking. It had captured everything. I played it back. The word was there, unmistakable. My own voice, but slower, colder. I copied the file to every backup I had, then shut it off. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed only what I needed, journal, tablet, recorder, and left the rest. By first light, I was already moving west toward the river. The cave, the camp, all of it faded behind me. I made it to the ranger station by late afternoon, empty. No signs of struggle, but no power, no comms. Just one folder left on the desk, half buried under maps. Inside were field reports dated 5 years ago. Another biologist, different name, same department. Her notes matched mine almost exactly. Glyph patterns, lunar shifts, audio anomalies. Her final entry was short. They don't kill you, they change you. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I burned the folder. I kept walking. I reached the nearest village 2 days later, exhausted and barely coherent. I didn't tell them much, just said I was lost. They believed me, or maybe they didn't want to know more. I left the region within a week. No papers. No interviews. I submitted my grant closure quietly and took a position cataloguing museum specimens in a coastal lab. No field work. No forests. But even now,
I still listen. Every night. I keep the recordings hidden. I never play them out loud because the howlers don't hunt everyone. Only those who believe. And I know deep down that what followed me out of that jungle wasn't finished.
Not yet. I saw it once, reflected in a lab mirror. A brief flicker behind my eyes. Wrong shape, wrong colour, just long enough for me to look away. But sometimes, when I speak, I hear it underneath. That slow, soft clicking, syncing with my breath. Waiting. The rain only falls once a year, and every drop smells like rusted iron and something older, something that remembers us. When I arrived in Belling Creek, I didn't come for folklore. I came for data. The assignment was simple. Accompany a hydrology team to collect seasonal samples from the Highland Forest Basin, analyze the soil saturation, and report anything anomalous to the university. What no one mentioned, not in the briefing, not in the satellite maps, and certainly not in the budget proposal, was the colour of the rain. I first saw it from the ridge, a slow-moving crimson sheet drifting down through the canopy, painting the moss and leaves in streaks of diluted blood. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, reverent. The kind of silence that seems to be listening back. The others, locals I was told, had already gone still. Not one spoke as we passed them on the trail. Men, women, even children, barefoot and up, painted in ochre, standing beneath the trees like part of the landscape. Some held small wooden carvings, others raised bowls to the sky, collecting the red water with the solemnity of a funeral rite. One man locked eyes with me for just a moment. There was no aggression, no fear, only warning. By nightfall the rain hadn't stopped. I stood outside our cabin, watching it soak the ground until the forest floor began to exhale that sweet, coppery breath. My partner, Mallory, ran the samples through a handheld spectrometer. Her face changed when she saw the screen. Hemoglobin, she muttered, and something else, non-human cells, no mitochondrial structure, no identifiable proteins. This isn't from anything alive, not now. We sent a preliminary report to the university. No reply. Then the satellite uplink dropped entirely. Mallory blamed the storm. I wasn't so sure. That night I woke to a rhythmic pounding, far off, like drums from beneath the ground. The air in the cabin was thick, tinged with the same
scent as the rain, sweet, metallic, alive. Tomorrow the locals will begin their ritual.
We were told to stay inside. They didn't say what would happen if we didn't. Morning came slowly, filtered through a red haze that clung to the trees like smoke. The rain had stopped, but everything still glistened. The forest floor was a slick mat of dark mud and crimson puddles. Mallory was already outside, crouched near one of the larger collection trays. She didn't speak as I approached, just handed me the latest readings. The hemoglobin levels had doubled. No animal blood we'd ever studied behaved this way. It wasn't breaking down, it was holding, almost stabilizing, as if it wanted to remain viable. We tried again to reach the university. Nothing. No satellite, no radio, not even static. Just a dead line. Mallory kept her voice low. I could feel it too. Something in the woods had changed. The trees didn't sway, the birds didn't call. Even the insects had gone silent. By noon, the villagers had gathered at the clearing downriver. We watched from the cabin. None of them looked toward us. They formed a wide circle, their heads bowed, their movements slow and deliberate. Each carried something: bowls of red water, bundles of bark, wooden masks painted in the same dull red. They placed these items in the soil, then knelt, all at once, silent, still, waiting. Mallory whispered that she'd seen movement in the beat sample tray, translucent strands, hair-thin, shifting on their own. I leaned closer and saw them too. Not bacteria, not larvae. Threads that responded to the air. Not with the wind, there was none, but as if drawn by heat or breath. That night we heard the sound again. Drums or something close. But this time the ground trembled beneath our feet, subtle but certain, like something deep below was stirring.
Mallory didn't sleep. Neither did I. There was something under us, not rock, not water, something warm, something breathing, and we were standing right on top of it. By the third day the ground had stopped trembling, but the silence lingered.
Not the quiet of wilderness, but an unnatural stillness, like the forest was waiting. Mallory had stopped running tests. She sat by the window most of the day, watching the trees with a fixed, distant focus. She said very little, except once, when she told me the air was changing. Not in pressure or temperature, something deeper. The samples confirmed it, elevated, carbon levels, trace compounds we couldn't identify. It wasn't from the rain, it was coming up from the ground. I left the cabin around noon to check the upper basin. The trail was damp, but walkable, the canopy darker than usual. Leaves shimmered with an oily sheen. Deeper in, I noticed the trees weren't growing straight, their trunks curved inward, bending toward the center of the basin. I'd seen trees reach for light or water, but never like this. It was as if they were listening. At the clearing, where the villagers had performed their ritual, the soil felt soft, almost spongy. When I knelt to take a sample, I saw it, crimson bubbles rising through the mud in slow, rhythmic pulses. Not random, timed, as if it had a heartbeat. I radioed Mallory, no response. When I returned, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing in her notebook, dozens of pages filled with repeating patterns, spirals, radiating lines, overlapping symbols. She didn't stop when I entered. I asked if she was okay. She looked up, eyes unfocused. "It's not rain," she said. "It's breath. The forest is exhaling." That night, the red rain returned. No thunder, no wind, just the soft, steady patter of blood-warm droplets on the roof. And from the woods, a low sound, a sigh, as if something beneath the forest had finally woken up. By morning, the rain had stopped again, but everything outside still glistened with that red sheen. The soil had darkened, almost black, thick with moisture that no longer looked like water. Mallory hadn't spoken since last night. She just stared at her notebook, now filled from front to back. When I tried to take it, she pulled it close and whispered, "It's a cycle, breathing in, breathing out." I didn't press her. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I returned to the clearing alone. The air was denser now, with a faint scent of iron and sap. At the center of the ritual site, the ground had collapsed. A narrow sinkhole had opened where the offerings had been placed. A faint mist rose from it. I crouched near the edge. There was no sound, just a low, wet pulse, like fluid shifting beneath pressure. I lowered a probe. It took longer than expected to reach bottom. The readings were strange. High organic content, elevated heat signatures, and living tissue markers. Not plant, not animal, something in between. I called Mallory again. Nothing. Back at the cabin, she was gone, her bag still by the door. Her notebook lay open on the table, the final page marked with a simple drawing, a circle split in half with fine lines radiating outward like veins. Below it, one word in pencil, awakening. I searched the trails, no footprints, no broken branches. It was like she had stepped into the forest and vanished. That night, the drums came back, louder than before. The vibrations traveled through the floor, through my legs, into my chest. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the trees lean inward again, bowing to something rising underneath. I set out at first light, retracing Mallory's last path. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, humid, metallic, almost electrical. The forest no longer looked the same. Roots had risen from the ground in loops and coils, forming strange arches and ridges where none had been before. I followed them, unsure why. They all curved in the same direction, toward the basin's core. An hour in, I found her scarf snagged on a branch. A little farther, the trail opened into a ravine. At the center, the ground was stripped bare. No leaves, no moss, just raw soil glistening dark red. A low mound sat at the center, round and breathing. I crept closer. The earth beneath me softened. My boots sank. The tracker in my hand flickered. Temperature spikes, static bursts, magnetic shifts. Then I heard her voice, faint, calm, from inside the mound. I can see it now. It's not underground, it is the ground. I shouted her name. No reply. The soil rippled again, slow but deliberate. I took a step back. The surface rose and fell in quiet intervals, measured, controlled, breathing. I marked the spot and returned to the cabin. I didn't touch it. I knew if I did, something would change. Something I couldn't undo. That night, I heard her voice again. Not outside. Inside. Soft. Near. She wasn't calling for help. She was inviting me back. I stayed up through the night. The voice never came again, but I felt movement beneath the floor. Slow shifts in pressure, subtle creaks in the wood. By morning the cabin felt colder, though the air was still thick. I packed what I could and left. The university wasn't sending help. No one was. This wasn't a storm event or a rare biological anomaly. It was older, buried, alive. I didn't return to the mound. Instead, I followed the roots again. They weren't natural. Every few hundred feet I found fresh, narrow holes, smooth, circular, and far too precise. I reached the southern ridge by late afternoon. The hillside had partially collapsed. Embedded in the exposed earth was something that didn't belong, a curved surface, slick and dark, pulsing slightly beneath loose soil. I scraped it clean with my gloves. It wasn't rock. It was organic, dense and textured like hide, warm to the touch. I stepped back as the hill itself vibrated, A long, low resonance passed through the ground. Not sound, something deeper. I realized then the red rain wasn't falling. It was being pushed out, exhaled. The forest wasn't just reacting. It was part of the organism. A membrane. The villagers weren't afraid. They weren't protecting themselves. They were feeding.
Honoring it.
I hiked back under a grey sky. The red was fading from the leaves, drying into rust. The season was ending. Whatever was buried would sleep again until next year. Unless someone woke it up first. I didn't report what I saw. Not the samples, not the readings, not Mallory. I submitted a generic summary: weather disruptions, equipment malfunction, incomplete data.
No one questioned it. The funding will continue. Another team will come. They won't know what they're standing on. Maybe that's the point. I left quietly. The locals expected it. The elder by the trailhead nodded as I passed, as if to say,
"Now you understand." I think I do. Back home, I reviewed the data one last time. The hemoglobin was synthetic in form but organic in behavior. The cells were designed, not human, not animal. The soil samples carried a bioelectric charge strong enough to distort magnetic fields. And the seismic pulses. They matched the rhythm of human REM sleep. I never contacted Mallory's family. I still don't know what she became. Maybe she's still beneath that soil, part of it now. Dreaming with it. Waiting. I've deleted the files. Burned the notes. Moved twice. Still I wake sometimes to that smell, metallic and sweet, and the sound of distant drums. Sometimes I hear her voice again. It's not rain, it's breath. And I wonder, how deep does it go? What if the forest floor is only a thin skin over something older, something vast and dreaming beneath us? Next year, when the red rain falls again, I won't be there, but I know it will be watching, and I know it remembers me. They weren't just walking backward, they were moving against time itself, and I think the camera aged 3 years just trying to capture it. It started with a glitch, or at least that's what we thought. A routine pass over the Orinoco. Basin, low orbit, cloudless skies, standard scan package. I was 2 months into my contract with Virion Systems, a private geospatial analytics firm quietly subcontracted by governments we were never allowed to name. Most of the footage we sifted through was as dull as it was endless. Mineral gradients, deforestation spreads, the occasional cartel convoy blurred by canopy. But this was different. I paused the feed when the anomaly first appeared. A tiny clearing near a washed-out tributary. No roads, no signs of habitation, and yet there they were, a cluster of figures moving deliberately but in reverse, step after step, backward through the jungle like a film running the wrong way. I thought it was a rendering error. Some frames corrupted during transmission. So I ran diagnostics, then I ran them again. No artifacts, no packet loss. Just raw, stable footage of people moving against the natural order of time. My supervisor, Mendez, didn't say a word when I showed him. He just picked up the phone and said, "Activate Project Straylight." Within 36 hours, a 5-person field team was on a black transport flight, outfitted with temporal sensors, magnetic recon drones, and enough non-lethal crowd deterrents to pacify a village. Their last communication was a simple text ping from the jungle floor. Confirmed visual. Moving in. That was 17 days ago. All we ever got back were the prints, footprints, if you could even call them that, retrieved by an aerial drone, tasked with tracing the team's final coordinates. But they weren't impressions in the dirt. Not really. The earth was unbroken. Instead, they appeared as depressions in time itself. The grass where they'd stepped grew shorter, fresher. Leaves nearby were unfallen, green with impossible youth. And then the survivor returned. We don't know how she made it back. One morning, she was just sitting outside the Virion compound gate, naked, eyes hollow. She hasn't spoken a word since. But she writes, always backwards, always in what a linguist later identified as reversed ancient Sumerian. And somewhere in those forgotten symbols is a word she's carved over and over into the walls of her isolation room. Unhappening. They quarantined her within the hour. No name, no ID, no trace of how she got there. We cross-referenced the biometric logs from the field team, but she wasn't in the system, not officially. But when I looked at her face, I recognized the eyes. Agent Renna Falk. She'd been part of the second wave, a classified group dispatched after the first team failed to report back. Her file was marked redacted, even at my clearance level. She wasn't supposed to exist, and yet there she was, pressing those reversed Sumerian glyphs into the padded wall with her fingernail, humming the same four-note pattern again and again. I've worked with linguists, analysts, even behavioral profilers. None of them could explain what she was writing, but I noticed something they didn't. The word unhappening, she always carved it in a perfect spiral, starting from the center and working outward. Dr. Lenning, our lead temporal physicist, isolated the last known GPS ping from Falk's team. The location was deep inside the uncharted basin, beyond where satellites could give us live imaging. But Lenning did something unusual. He reversed the time code of the coordinates. Just flipped the digits as if they were a mirror image. When the system processed the reversed data, something strange happened. The simulation engine rendered the jungle differently, older, less eroded, even showing species of flora that should have gone extinct thousands of years ago. That's when we realized the anomaly wasn't just spatial. Time itself was bending, or folding, or running backward. The satellite logs showed that the area around the reversed coordinates had a faint, repeating distortion. Barely perceptible, but rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And within that pulse was something even stranger, a signal, a slow, consistent transmission, embedded within the distortion, too subtle for standard decoding. Lenning called it a temporal echo. That night I stayed late in the lab, reviewing the data stream. At exactly 03:17 a.m., the signal shifted, just once, enough to trigger a motion event on the perimeter camera closest to Falk's room. When I rewound the feed, I saw her standing in the corner, eyes closed, speaking the word unhappening for the first time. Only the footage played in reverse, and she never moved her lips. 2 days after the anomaly in Falk's room, we lost contact with drone V9. It had been deployed to survey the perimeter of the reversed coordinates, capturing thermal and magnetic data from high altitude. The drone's last transmission was a still image, trees bending unnaturally inward, as if pulled by some invisible center. Then nothing. No crash signal, no GPS trace, It simply vanished from the grid. Command ordered a satellite sweep, but the results came back unreadable. The scan showed a perfect circle of black static over the coordinates, like a hole punched through the map. Dr. Lenning reviewed the telemetry and confirmed the impossible. The timestamps inside the anomaly zone had inverted. Every second in, that area ticked backward, and the further you moved toward the center, the faster it reversed. The decision was made to send a manned expedition, a 4-person team. No cameras, no radio comms, only analog equipment, notebooks, and a return deadline of 12 hours. They were instructed not to approach the center of the anomaly. I watched them disappear into the tree line through a long-range lens. No words, just 4 figures moving cautiously into stillness. For hours, nothing happened. Then just before the deadline, we heard it. A low hum across the forest, like 100 voices whispering in sync. It wasn't coming from any speaker, but from the trees themselves. The leaves vibrated slightly, shedding dew upward instead of down. The team's return was exactly on time. All 4 emerged from the brush, calm, uninjured, and mute. Not a single one of them would speak. They walked directly to the quarantine trailer and sat down without instruction. Medical scans showed abnormal neural activity, but no physical harm. Then we checked their notebooks. Every page was filled, identical symbols drawn in reverse, like Falk's carvings. But unlike hers, these weren't just spirals. They formed diagrams, maps. And at the center of each map was a single word written in English, scrawled in shaky block letters. Origin. The forest had given something back, but it had taken more than we understood. The team was whole in body, but something about them had been rewritten, and they were no longer aging. They ran blood work 3 times. Same result. 0 cellular decay, telomere lengths consistent with subjects 15 years younger, bone density, organ tissue, mitochondrial. Health, all markers of age had reversed. Not paused, reversed. The med team tried to explain it as a data error, but the truth was clear. The expedition team was de-aging, slowly, predictably. Falk, too. Her hair, once streaked with grey in archived personnel photos, was now jet black. Her skin showed no blemishes, no signs of stress or wear. It was as if time itself had been pulled out from under her, replaced by something colder and more precise. The lead analyst on the notebooks, Dr. Shin, began noticing overlaps between the reversed Sumerian and the magnetic pulse logs recorded near the anomaly. Every line, every glyph mapped to a waveform. Not just language, not just symbols, instructions. We fed one of the maps into our pattern recognition software. The algorithm identified a structure, something buried beneath the forest floor, roughly 4 kilometers wide. Not rock, not metal, no known material. It pulsed in sync with the hum we'd recorded. Worse, the structure moved, not across space, but across time. Its presence shifted backward by seconds each hour, like it was unraveling its own history. We estimated that in less than 6 days it would reach a temporal 0 point, a moment before recorded time in that region even began. No one knew what would happen then. That same night I reviewed security footage from the quarantine wing. One of the de-aged team members, Captain Reese, stood beside the mirror for 7 full hours. He didn't move, not even to blink. The video showed him staring, face relaxed, eyes fixed. Only when I reversed the footage did I understand. He wasn't staring into the mirror. He was watching something behind it. A shadow, faint and flickering, perfectly still. It only appeared. When the footage was played backward, the same figure appeared behind Falk's bed 2 nights later. We enhanced the frame and ran a match against the anomaly signal. It wasn't human. It wasn't alive. But it knew we were watching, and it was watching back. By the end of the week, the anomaly was no longer localized. The soil samples collected from the outer forest began to show inverted isotope decay. Plants wilted in reverse, brown leaves turning green, fallen branches lifting from the ground as if caught in rewind. Lenning developed a predictive model to estimate the reversal's spread. According to the projection, the effect would double its radius every 30 hours. Within 10 days it would reach the river. In 20, the nearest village. At its current pace, the world wouldn't have time to react. Command brought in a contingency team from Black Signal Division. Not scientists, not analysts. Operators trained for situations that didn't officially exist. Their leader, Agent Cray, requested access to all research data, all samples and all personnel records related to the anomaly. We complied. We didn't have a choice. By then, half of our core staff had begun exhibiting mild symptoms, short-term memory glitches, synchronized dreams, and an overwhelming urge to return to the forest. Then we lost Reese. His room was sealed. 2 guards on rotation. But one morning, he was simply gone. The door hadn't opened. The cameras never blinked. He disappeared without a trace, except for one thing. On the mirror, scrawled in the same reversed script Falk had used, was a short phrase, translated and rechecked by Shin. "Let the loop close." It wasn't a warning, it was a request. Falk grew more coherent as her physical age dropped. She started drawing diagrams instead of spirals, schematics showing the same underground structure, always with a distinct center marked in red ink. One night she spoke again. Not in Sumerian this time, but in perfect English. She looked directly into the camera and said, "They're not reversing time, they're correcting it." We played that clip for Cray's team, me. His response was immediate. He ordered a controlled burn of the entire forest zone and the detonation of a kinetic ground charge over the anomaly. The plan was simple. Erase the source. Bury the signal. The operation was set for sunrise, but by then the anomaly had already passed the point of reversal, and the burn team was walking backward into the fire. We watched in silence as the burn team entered the zone. The operation feed streamed clean for the first 3 minutes, infrared, body cams, drone visuals. Then came the drift. At first it was subtle. The flame fronts curved in on themselves. Wind flowed inward, not out. Ash lifted instead of falling. And the team? Their footsteps reversed, gear moving back into bags, ignition charges reassembled, like time was rejecting their presence. Agent Cray didn't react. He stood with arms crossed, jaw locked. Then he shut off the main feed and ordered radio silence. I knew what that meant. Containment had failed. The anomaly was immune to destruction. Worse, it was using us. Each attempt to erase it only reinforced the loop. Falk deteriorated rapidly after that. Her speech became fragmented. Her drawings are more erratic. She stopped eating, yet her vitals showed no decline. Her body kept de-aging, now indistinguishable from a teenager. But her eyes, those never changed. They held an awareness we couldn't place. I found her staring at a blank monitor in the control room late one night. No guards, no record of her entering. She looked at me and said, "You've seen them too, haven't you?" I didn't answer. She continued. They're not bound by time. They exist between its frames, watching us try to fix what was never broken. That same night, Lenning's model updated itself. It showed the reversal no longer expanding outward, but inward, collapsing into a point, a convergence, all paths folding toward one exact moment. One exact location, the original coordinates. I checked the system logs. 4 months ago, a temporary satellite glitch had recorded the tribe walking backward for the first time. The timestamp of that footage, 03:17 a.m., the same moment Falk first whispered unhappening. The same minute every subject began their reverse aging. The convergence wasn't an end, it was a reset, a return, and the closer we got to it, the more everything around us, memory, time, even identity, became uncertain. That's when we saw the tribe again, not in the jungle, not on any camera, but in our own reflections, walking backwards through our lives. I left the compound at first light. There was no order, no directive, just a quiet certainty that if I stayed, I would forget everything. Faces were already fading. Files disappeared from the system mid-access. Even Lenning didn't recognize me when I passed him in the hall. He stared like I was a stranger, then turned away as if nothing had happened. The effect was no longer limited to those exposed. It was spreading through memory itself. I took only what I could carry. A field map. A worn notebook. One still image of the tribe, blurry and half-corrupted. I followed the same path the first team had taken through the jungle, past the edge of the reversal zone. Time there didn't feel wrong. It felt delicate, as if the air itself might shatter. The sun moved too slowly. My heartbeat echoed out of rhythm with my footsteps. At the center, I found the clearing. Not empty, not forgotten, just paused. And there they were, the tribe. 10 figures walking in perfect unison, backward around a circle of stones. Their feet never touched the ground. The earth bent upward. To meet them, I should have felt fear, but I didn't. Just a deep, sinking calm. Falk stood beside the stones, no older than a child now, but her voice carried across the stillness as though it had weight. "This isn't their place," she said. "It's ours. We broke time. They're just walking it back." I stepped into the circle without thinking. The world didn't shift. It was uncoiled. Sounds reversed. Color drained from the sky. I saw my own memories unravel, not as flashes, but as living moments folding into themselves. Childhood, training, first deployment, first lie. I remembered why I joined Virion. I remembered who I had been before the clearance, before the silence. And then, just for a moment, I understood.
This wasn't a loop, it wasn't a punishment, it was a restoration. They weren't walking backward, they were walking home. And now so was I.
They told me light reveals the truth, but in that village, the more we looked, the less there was to see. I didn't expect anything unusual that morning. The drone sweep was part of a routine environmental survey for thermal irregularities. An automatic scan across the Rockies after a minor solar flare event. I monitored the feeds from a dim lab 2 floors below ground level, my coffee half cold, eyes bleary from too many near-identical heat maps. Then one of the analysts flagged something strange, a perfect grid, dozens of buildings in a symmetrical pattern, clean and vivid, but with no shadows. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. Light without shadow is like mass without gravity. It doesn't happen. But there it was. Trees, rooftops, even figures, faint human silhouettes, each casting nothing. The drone circled again. Same result. Spectral signature intact. No visible displacement from any object. Just light. Bright, crisp, and unnaturally flat. We logged the coordinates, remote sector, roughly 60 miles west of Fort Garland, Colorado. No record of a settlement there. No access roads. The village didn't even register on historical overlays or topographic archives. But the infrared showed something deeper. Heat signatures, not just ambient, moving, human-sized blips, breathing warmth where no one stood. We dispatched a team at first light. I volunteered, but was sidelined. Too valuable behind screens, they said. I watched from a command console as the crew hiked into the valley. Clear skies, stable signals. The approach was textbook. Then the first report came through. Nothing. Coordinates confirmed, terrain matched, but no structures, no grid, no signs of life. The drone's footage from just 6 hours earlier showed a thriving village. Now only wind-scoured rock and highland scrub. Still the thermal gear told a different story. The heat signatures remained, standing in empty fields, lining non-existent alleyways, the exact formation of the village from the footage, but invisible, intangible. That's when the lead operator's voice cracked. "My shadow's gone," he said. "I'm standing in full sun and there's nothing behind me." I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning, not of the story, of the unraveling. At first, they thought it was the equipment. The team leader, Hoffman, tapped his helmet lens and stepped into open sun, waving his hand against the light like it would somehow reset his vision. But the camera feed confirmed it. No shadow. Not his, not the medics, not the technicians. They checked the angles, recalibrated the sensors, even ran a makeshift light test with a mirror. The sun was real. The angles checked out. The light was hitting them exactly as it should. And still, nothing. It wasn't just the absence of shadow, it was the absence of contrast. Like the light passed through them, but didn't land. As if something beneath the surface of that valley distorted the laws we thought were fixed. They didn't panic, not at first. Training kicks in even when your instincts scream. They logged the anomaly and kept moving, stepping through where streets should have been. One of the thermal operators pointed to a patch of dirt where a house had appeared on the drone feed. 6 warm points, she said. 3 adult-sized, 3 smaller. They're not moving, but they're still warm. Hoffman hesitated before kneeling at the site, pressing his gloved hand to the soil. Then his voice came through tight and low. There's warmth, like the ground remembers. I watched it all from the console room, the chill of recycled air suddenly sharp. In my lungs, I could see it happening to them, not fast, not dramatic, but slow, like something unseen was pressing down. Their voices grew flatter. The medic reported nausea. Hoffman forgot the team's call signs for a full minute, had to check his slate just to name the technician. I tried to radio command to pull them back, but protocol held. They wanted a full sweep. 10 more minutes, just 10. Then one of them said it. The youngest, Davis. His voice quiet, calm. I think I'm fading, he said. I don't mean that metaphorically. I looked down just now, my boot print's still in the dirt. But I don't remember stepping there. That's when I saw it on the feed. He was still there, but less so. The light had taken something, not just his shadow, his presence, his weight in the world. After Davis spoke, the air in the control room shifted. None of us said it aloud, but we all felt it. The silence had weight now. I replayed the footage, frame by frame, watching as the edges of Davis's outline softened. His colours dulled, like someone had reduced the saturation. He didn't seem alarmed, just distant, as if he knew something we didn't. The others began, reporting strange things too. Hoffman's watch was spinning backward, ticking in reverse. The medic's compass needle was trembling, not pointing north, but circling. I radioed command again, demanding an immediate extraction. This time there was no resistance. Something in my voice must have cut through protocol. They gave the order, return to base. But the team couldn't find the direction they'd come from. Every landmark was gone. The rise they descended was now flat. The dry creek bed they'd crossed had water, shallow but flowing upstream. They walked in what should have been a straight line, but the drone overhead showed them moving in a spiral, curving gently inward. That's when I saw the pattern. It wasn't random. The village, the heat signatures, even the terrain itself. It was forming a shape. A perfect, impossible geometry that repeated no matter the scale. It reminded me of fractals, or ancient glyphs etched into stone, patterns that made sense in form but not in origin. Then we lost Davis. He didn't scream or run, he just stopped responding. One moment he was in the feed following the others, the next he was gone. No signal loss, no interference, just gone. His body heat remained for a few minutes, hovering where he'd stood, then faded like steam. The team froze. They called his name, circled back, retraced their steps. But there was nothing, no trace, not even a footprint. And then Hoffman looked down and said quietly, "My shadow's back." He wasn't lying. The others had shadows too, long, distorted, but real. They seemed relieved until they noticed something else. The shadows weren't moving with them. They lagged behind. Half.
A second off, as if watching, not following. By the time the team made it back to the extraction point, the light had shifted again.
Not dimmer, just wrong. Brighter in places it shouldn't be. Shadows extended in opposing directions, bending away from the sun. From my console, I could see the distortion on the satellite feed. The village grid, the one that had vanished, had reappeared in thermal. Not in full, just a faint outline, like a watermark on the land. The structures were still invisible to the eye, but their heat signatures pulsed in time with solar flare activity. Hoffman called it a heartbeat. He wasn't wrong. Every 10 seconds a low-frequency pulse rattled through the sensors. The readings were faint but measurable, like an artificial seismic wave with no source. Command pulled the team as soon as they cleared the ridge. A black transport was waiting. They were rushed into isolation without speaking to anyone. I requested access to their body cam footage. The files were clean, but something was missing. Gaps where entire minutes should have been. Each file ended on the same frame. The team, just before Davis vanished, all looking in the same direction. But none
of them remembered turning. They all claimed they never stopped moving.
The next day, I was assigned to review satellite sweeps from the week before the incident. I searched the coordinates going back 5 years. The village never appeared once, not until the morning of the flare. But something else caught my eye. During each solar anomaly over that region, the thermal imaging showed a brief distortion, not a shape, but a pattern. Concentric rings radiating outward, like the heat signature of a massive object that had never cooled. I overlaid the rings with the village's location and paused. The geometry matched exactly. It wasn't just bleeding into our world randomly, it was returning to a fixed point, and each return was stronger, more precise. I printed the overlay
and stared at it for hours, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did.
Whatever that village was, it hadn't vanished. It had receded, and it was coming back, not all at once. Slowly, like light gathering behind a mirror. 3 days later, Hoffman was gone. Not transferred, missing, no alert, no formal statement. His quarters were cleaned out before sunrise. The rest of the team remained under observation, but one by one they began to change. Subtle things at first, delayed responses, gaps in memory. The medic wrote coordinates on her skin every morning, then claimed no knowledge of doing so. The technician, Ramirez, stopped speaking entirely, though medical scans showed nothing wrong with his brain or throat. They weren't sick, not exactly. They were fading, just like Davis had. But not physically. Their presence, their weight, their hold on this world, it was loosening. I pulled old seismic records again, focusing on solar anomalies from the past decade. Only one other incident
came close.
In 2017, a fire crew near the San Juan Range reported lights hovering above a ridge after a flare. The footage was dismissed as lens flares, the heat signatures as faulty calibration, but the coordinates matched the edge of the same geometry I'd found. The incident was buried in a weather anomaly report marked non-causal. I dug deeper and found more. Hunters reporting animals vanishing mid-step, hikers lost for hours then found disoriented, convinced they'd only been gone minutes. Always near solar peaks, always within that same radius. I brought my findings to one of the project leads. She listened silently, then asked a single question. "Did your shadow move today?" I didn't know what to say. She closed the file without comment and left me sitting there. That night I tested it myself. I stood under a floodlight behind the lab and moved slowly. My shadow followed. Almost. A second behind, like it was remembering me rather than reflecting me. Whatever the village was, it didn't just exist. It observed, it adapted. Each time it touched our world, it reached further, held longer, and now it wasn't waiting for us to find it. It was mapping us, measuring who we were, where we stood, and how long we'd last before the light took hold. We thought we were watching the anomaly, but I was beginning to understand we were the anomaly, and it was watching us. After Hoffman's disappearance, a new directive came down. All investigation was to cease. Satellite feeds were locked. Access to the incident files was revoked. Even internal communication channels were scrubbed. I wasn't officially dismissed, but I was reassigned to an unrelated logistics role overnight, a quiet way of telling me to stop digging. But I couldn't. Not when I already knew too much. And not when I started seeing signs in places they didn't belong. It wasn't just in the footage anymore. The patterns had followed me. Subtle changes in how light fell across my desk, reflections in the lab windows that didn't line up with anything behind me. My shadow, once slow, now sometimes absent entirely. I kept my movements quiet, used secure drives, printed maps when no one was watching. I marked the return intervals, cross-referencing each flare with the grid's thermal pulses. The intervals were shrinking. What once took years now came in weeks. The geometry was stabilizing. I checked the village site one last time from a private terminal off the main network. It was there. Not visible, but present. The heat signatures had stopped pulsing. They were constant now, fixed. Not just ghosts of people who weren't there, but temperatures consistent with living bodies. Then the feed cut, static just for a second. When it returned, the heat signatures were gone. I stared at the screen, thinking it was over. But a new pattern emerged, clearer than anything before. It wasn't the village, it was us, the base, our coordinates, our layout, perfectly mapped in thermal, down to individual workstations. It had memorized us. I checked. The timestamp, the feed, was 2 minutes behind real time. It was watching a version of us that had just passed. That night I packed everything I had, coordinates, printouts, written notes. I left the facility and never returned. I couldn't explain it to anyone who hadn't seen what I had. They'd think I'd lost touch with reality. Maybe I had, but every time the sun shifted behind the clouds and shadows disappeared for just a second, I felt it watching. Not through cameras or drones, through the light itself, as if it was no longer just reaching across dimensions. It was already here. I live alone now, off-grid, somewhere deep in the foothills where satellite coverage thins and the horizon stays still. I keep the windows shuttered during the day and only light a single lamp at night, one with an old filament bulb that casts soft, imperfect shadows. It's the only way I know I'm still here. Each morning, before I do anything else, I check the floor. My shadow should fall left from the window. If it doesn't, I don't move. I wait. Some days it returns in seconds. Others, not at all. I've read through my notes so many times the pages are fraying. The data is clear. The geometry of the village was a lock. Not physical, but temporal. Something old, hidden in light, reactivating each time the sun crossed a specific threshold. It was never meant to be found, not by us. It belonged to a civilization that learned to bend presence around visibility, a culture that understood how to erase itself from perception by aligning with certain solar conditions. They didn't die out. They didn't leave. They folded inward, hiding in the patterns of light itself. Staying near the village too long changes you, not instantly, not violently. You just start to lose your imprint. First the shadow, then the memory of where you've been. Then something deeper. A kind of resonance begins. A pull. I felt it in the last days at the lab. The urge to walk into open sunlight without reason. The feeling that the place wasn't dangerous but welcoming. That it wanted me to step forward and let go. That's what happened to Davis. And maybe Hoffman, and maybe, slowly, to everyone who stayed behind. I haven't spoken to anyone from the facility in months. Most of the contacts I had are unreachable, either reassigned or erased. And I've stopped trying to warn anyone. Because this isn't something you explain, it's something you feel when the light shifts a fraction too far, or when your reflection lags in the mirror, or when your shadow no longer follows. I don't know if I've escaped it or become part of it. Some days I can't remember what I did the day before, but I always remember to check the floor. If the shadow's gone, I don't leave the room. I don't speak. I just wait. Because if it doesn't return by sunset, I won't either. At first, we thought it was weather data, until we realized the jungle was moving like it had a pulse. I was 2 weeks into a satellite imaging contract for a government environmental agency when I noticed it, an oscillation in the canopy of the western Amazon, almost imperceptible unless you ran a time lapse over several days. But there it was, the forest moved. Every 12 hours the same patch of dense jungle would expand and contract, slowly, rhythmically, as if it were breathing. At first I thought it was a glitch in the data, maybe interference from cloud cover or a sensor hiccup, but I checked. Everything twice, even pulled raw feeds directly from the satellite archives. It was real. I sent the data to Dr. Milton Vega, a geologist I trusted from my grad school days, thinking it had to be tectonic, maybe a previously undocumented fault line flexing under pressure. He wrote back the next day saying the soil layers were stable. No seismic events, no uplift, no subsidence. Nothing geological explains this, he wrote. Are you sure you're not seeing evapotranspiration effects? I wasn't. I knew those patterns. This was something else. I needed another opinion, so I contacted Dr. Alessandra Nunes, a botanist who'd spent the last 15 years studying forest network signaling. We spoke by video late at night, her face backlit by candlelight. No power, she said, thanks to a week of floods. When I showed her the footage, she went very still. Don't send this to anyone else, she said.
Not yet.
I asked her why, but she just leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a theory among field ecologists down here. Not something we publish, the idea that certain portions of the rainforest, deep, untouched zones, may not be ecosystems, not really, not in the plural, they might be singular. She hesitated. A single living organism. Distributed, yes, but aware, coordinated. I laughed nervously. She didn't. We think it sleeps, has for millennia. That was the moment it stopped being science and started feeling like something else, something I wasn't ready for. but I couldn't unsee it now. Something down there was moving, and I had the feeling it had just started to wake up. I flew to Manaus 3 days later. Alessandra insisted we meet in person. She didn't trust phones anymore, let alone encrypted calls. When I landed, the heat hit me like a wall, wet, heavy, and unrelenting. The city was a maze of noise and humidity, a strange contrast to what I was there for. She picked me up in an old Land Rover, its paint faded, windshield cracked. No questions, no greetings, just a nod, and we drove. We left the city behind in less than an hour, the buildings giving way to endless green. I tried to ask her what she thought was happening, but she only said, "You'll understand when we get there." For hours we moved deeper into the jungle, the dirt roads narrowing until they became little more than paths. Finally, we stopped at a research outpost, half collapsed, half swallowed by the forest. Inside, everything smelled of damp paper and old wood. Alessandra showed me a map tacked to the wall, its surface covered in red marks. "This is the region you saw on the satellite," she said, tapping the largest circle. "We've known something was off here for years. Animals behave differently. Trees flower at irregular intervals. And then there's the silence." She opened a drawer and handed me an old audio recorder. This was from last month. No birds, no insects, nothing. I pressed play. Static. Then a faint hum. Low, steady, almost mechanical, but organic in tone. It made my skin crawl. "That's not wind," I said. She nodded. "It matches the breathing cycle." She paused. 2 weeks ago, the ground
here rose 7 inches in under 10 hours. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then it sank again. I didn't know what to say. "You think it's alive?" She looked out the window. "I think it woke up." I felt the weight of her words settle
in my chest. The jungle outside seemed to press against the walls, dense and unmoving. And yet, in that moment, it didn't feel still. It felt like it was watching, waiting. We set out before sunrise. Alessandra said the air was calmer in the early hours, that the forest was less reactive then. I didn't ask what she meant. Part of me didn't want to know. We hiked for hours, the terrain shifting from packed soil to thick roots and uneven stone. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the jungle was closing in. Branches bending low, vines thickening, light thinning into patches. Birds called from the distance, but only once. Then silence returned, heavier than before. Alessandra moved with quiet urgency, stopping only to check small devices buried in the dirt. "Soil sensors," she said. She showed me one of the readings. The moisture and pressure had spiked at exactly 4:12 a.m., then dropped. "Another breath," she said. "It's like it's syncing with something." I followed her deeper, until we reached a small clearing surrounded by cedars, their trunks massive and gnarled. In the center stood a mound of moss-covered stone. It looked like a ruin, maybe pre-Columbian, maybe older. But the strangest part was the pattern around it. Tree roots formed a near-perfect spiral, weaving in and out of the soil as if arranged. "This wasn't built," Alessandra said, crouching beside the spiral. "It grew this way." I knelt beside her, brushing away leaves. The soil was warm,
too warm. Beneath it, I felt a pulse, slow and steady. I pulled my hand back, startled. "It's like a heartbeat," I said. She didn't reply.
Instead, she opened her backpack and pulled out a sealed glass vial. Inside was a thick sap, dark and iridescent. "It's from the central tree," she said. "Collected 2 days ago." She opened the vial and poured a single drop into the soil. Nothing happened. Then the roots shifted. Not violently, but unmistakably. They tightened slightly, like muscles responding to a touch. We both stepped back. "It recognized it," she whispered. I wanted to speak, to ask how any of this was possible, but my throat was dry. Somewhere deep below, a sound like stone dragging against stone echoed faintly through the ground. Alessandra looked at me. "This isn't growth, it's movement. We camped near the spiral that night, too far in to turn back. Alessandra insisted we keep no fires, no lights. It senses change," she said. "Light disrupts it." The forest around us was silent again. No insects, no wind, just the slow, almost imperceptible rustle of leaves settling. I lay in my tent, staring at the thin nylon roof, listening to the pulse beneath the earth. It wasn't steady like a heartbeat. It came in slow intervals, maybe every 6 hours, a swell, a retreat, like tides but inverted. Just after midnight I stepped outside. The sky above was overcast, moonlight barely cutting through. I saw Alessandra sitting near the mound, still, almost reverent. She held a field notebook in her lap, but she wasn't writing, just watching. "It's accelerating," she said, without looking up. "We used to detect movement once every few days. Now it's daily, then 12 hours. Today it pulsed twice." I joined her, not speaking. The ground felt warmer now, as if something below was closer to the surface. "There's a theory," she said quietly, "that the entire basin is built over a buried structure, not man-made, older, much older. But when it shifted 2 years ago after that quake off the coast, the breathing started, like something was unsealed. I thought of the spiral roots, the sap that triggered movement, the rhythmic pulse in the ground. A biological system, but scaled beyond anything we understood. "Do you think it's conscious?" I asked. She finally looked at me. "I think it's learning, slowly but steadily, responding to inputs, patterning its cycles after ours." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, not from fear, but recognition. We weren't watching it, it was watching us, tracking time, adapting. She pointed to her notebook. I charted its rhythms against human activity, logging zones, flight paths.
Satellite passes, it mimics them, adjusts. That was when I understood. This wasn't just a living system.
It was responding like a nervous system, coordinated, self-regulating, evolving, and we were inside it, not observers, not intruders, more like impulses, signals, possibly threats. The idea settled into me like a weight I couldn't shake. The jungle wasn't growing. It was awakening. By morning, the forest had changed. It wasn't anything obvious, no dramatic shift in color or sound, but the paths we had used the day before were gone. The underbrush had rearranged itself, subtly but completely. Vines hung where there had been open space, and the clearing around the spiral was smaller, tighter. Alessandra noticed it too. "It's responding faster now," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. "It's not just learning, it's
anticipating." We packed our gear in silence. The atmosphere had shifted. There was pressure in the air, like the moment before a storm, only it never broke. We tried to retrace our route to the outpost, but nothing lined up. Even the sun felt
misaligned, casting light in the wrong directions. After 2 hours of walking, we reached a spot that should have taken 20 minutes. The jungle had distorted our sense of time and space. "It's reorienting itself," I said. "Around us." Alessandra didn't respond. She was staring at her GPS unit, which had gone static. No signal, no coordinates, just a blank screen. We stopped to rest beside a creek, shallow, slow-moving, its surface covered in leaf litter. As I filled my canteen, I noticed something under the water. Not a rock, not wood, something smooth, curved. I brushed the surface with my hand and a shape emerged, a dome the size of a manhole made of dark stone with a faint seam running down the center. It hummed faintly beneath my touch. Alessandra knelt beside me. "There are more," she said. "We found 3 others like this last year. One cracked open. It was hollow, empty." "What are they?" I asked. She looked at the tree line. "We think they're nodes, like synapses." I pulled my hand back slowly. The idea hit hard. If this was a nervous system, these weren't artifacts. They were components, functional, active. The hum grew slightly louder, just enough to feel in my chest. The water around the dome began to ripple outward in precise concentric circles. No wind, no movement, just that silent spreading signal. Something below had felt us, and it was sending a reply. We didn't speak for the next hour. Every step felt deliberate, like walking through an echo. Something recording us as much as we were observing it. The deeper we moved, the more I sensed that our presence wasn't just noticed, it was being measured. Alessandra kept her eyes forward. "The pulses are different," she said finally. "Shorter intervals, stronger returns." Her voice was quiet, as if volume might provoke a response. We climbed a ridge by late afternoon, looking for higher ground and perspective. From the top, the forest stretched in every direction, green, endless, alive. But one section stood out, a perfect circular clearing miles wide, its center rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I recognized it instantly. It was the zone I'd seen from satellite images. We sat in silence, watching the movement. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "The timing's exact," I said. "Every 50 minutes now." Alessandra nodded. "It used to be 1 cycle a day, then 12 hours, then 6. We're seeing a pattern evolve in real time." She handed me her audio recorder and replayed the hum we'd captured earlier. This time there were new layers, frequencies overlaying each other, rising and falling in structured repetition. It wasn't just vibration, it was modulation. "Have you mapped this against human activity?" I asked. She pulled out her field notebook and opened a page covered in tight, neat handwriting. Flight paths, satellite passes, soil disruption. Each pulse adjusts slightly after interference. Not always immediately, but consistently. Could just be environmental sensitivity, I said, though I didn't believe it. She looked at me. Or a form of primitive response, not intelligence, like ours, but something coordinated, something aware of input and change. The trees below shifted again, rows moving in sequence, almost too slow to catch unless you were waiting for it. I felt it then. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. This wasn't adaptation. It was alignment. I turned to her. What if this isn't a reaction to us? I asked. What if it's been doing this all along and we just finally noticed? She didn't answer, but the silence around us did. That night, the forest didn't rest. The pulses came every 40 minutes now, sharper, more forceful. The soil no longer swelled gently. It shifted in bursts like pressure building beneath the surface. We stayed on the ridge, surrounded by low, twisted trees. The brush seemed to lean inward, subtly closing around us. Neither of us said much. By then we both understood that something was accelerating, and we were inside it. Around 3 a.m., the forest below stirred. Entire rows of trees moved in sequence, not bending with wind, but shifting direction, deliberate, coordinated. From above it looked like a signal rippling across a vast surface. I raised my camera and filmed, hands trembling slightly. Even without playback, I knew what we were watching wasn't random. The rhythm was too precise, too intentional. Beside me, Alessandra checked her notes one last time and closed the notebook. It's moved past cycles, she said. This is behavior. I looked down at the slow, circular waves of motion spreading through the canopy. Like it's trying to show us something, I said, or trying to sink. She didn't respond right away. Then quietly, or it's deciding how to handle what doesn't belong. That landed hard. I had never felt so small, not threatened exactly, just irrelevant. We had been tracking an anomaly, studying it, trying to frame it in data and terms we understood, but it wasn't a pattern, it wasn't a symptom, it was the organism. The forest wasn't reacting to us. We were part of the signal. As the first light crept over the ridge, the movement stopped. Total stillness returned. No birds, no insects, just silence so dense it pressed against the ears. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. On the flight home, I reviewed the footage again. I slowed it down, watched frame by frame, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Tiny variations in the ripple pattern, spaced evenly, like spacing in a sentence or code. I haven't gone back, I haven't published the data, not because I'm afraid, but because I'm no longer sure it's ours to share. The Amazon wasn't waking up, it was waiting for something. Maybe it still is. Whatever it is, I think it's listening. They said nothing lived out there, but I saw movement, black shapes humming in harmony across land no map dared to mark. I was 2 weeks into a freelance cartography contract when I first heard the reports. The job was simple. Verify satellite data for a new zoning initiative near the Sabanu jungle. On paper, the region was empty. No settlements, no wildlife corridors, nothing unusual, but maps lie, or worse, they omit. Locals warned me in low voices to avoid the southern ridge.
Don't go near the silence, one man said.
I thought he meant no reception. I was wrong. At kilometre 84, the forest went mute. No birds, no insects. Even my own footsteps sounded distant. My GPS stalled, then rebooted. I reached for my field recorder. Dead, all of it was. Then I heard it. A hum, not mechanical, not natural. A steady, harmonic vibration rising from the ground. From the trees, 6 men emerged, uniforms matte black, no insignia, no visible faces. They walked in formation across a slope that didn't exist on my satellite overlay. No trail, no marks, just silence and song. I lifted my analog camera. The shutter jammed. When I looked back, they were gone. The hum faded, but its imprint stayed in my chest like a low-frequency echo. I returned to camp. Tried to upload data. Nothing transmitted. The modem worked yesterday. That night, something colder settled in me. Every device I brought, drones, satellite phone, even my compass, was wiped. Fully functional, fully empty, as if they hadn't malfunctioned, but been deliberately erased. And then I understood. I hadn't stumbled into a hidden zone. It had opened for me. I didn't sleep that night. The jungle outside my tent was too quiet, like the air itself was waiting for something. Around 3 a.m. I stepped out to clear my head. No stars, just a ceiling of low, unmoving cloud that seemed too thick, too still. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves, just that same hum, low and layered, like distant chanting buried beneath the earth. I knelt and pressed my hand to the soil. The vibration was subtle, but real, not random, not seismic. It was a pulse, regular, intentional. I tried to mark the coordinates, but the field tablet froze on startup. The backup compass spun in lazy circles. I scribbled a rough sketch in my notebook and returned at dawn. The area where I'd seen the men was untouched, not a branch out of place, but the atmosphere was wrong. I've done field work in deserts, mountains and blast zones. You can always feel when a place is alive. This patch wasn't. Not damaged, not poisoned, just paused. Still, I scanned the underbrush until I found it, a patch of soil darker than the rest. 2 meters across, perfectly circular. No growth inside, no roots, no debris. In the center, rings etched faintly like grooves. In vinyl, 4 of them, evenly spaced. I didn't step closer. My teeth were already buzzing. Then, for one terrifying moment, my hearing dropped out entirely. The silence was so total, it felt artificial. That center ring pulsed, just once. A shallow depression sank 1/2 inch, that's all. But I backed away slowly, never turning my back. I wasn't alone. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't see movement. But something had acknowledged me. Not as a threat, not as prey, as a variable. By the 3rd day, the silence wasn't limited to the clearing. It followed me. My radio only played static, even back near town. Birds stopped coming near the camp. I ran an EMF sweep across my gear. The meter didn't spike. It didn't move at all. As if nothing electromagnetic existed within a 5-kilometer radius. I should have packed up then. I told myself I would. But I returned to the ring once more at dawn, just to see if it had changed. It had. The soil was darker now, not wet, just darker, as if something beneath had stained it upward. The same 4 concentric rings were there, but now a 5th had appeared, narrow, precise, and pulsing faintly. I brought no electronics, just a notebook, a compass, and a hand-drawn map. The compass still spun, but slower, 5-second rotations.
As if the field around me had recalibrated. I stood there too long. Then they appeared again. 3 of them this time. The humming men. Identical uniforms, same silent formation. No weapons, no insignia. Their suits absorbed light, not reflective.
But dimming everything around them. They stood just beyond the outermost ring and began to hum. The sound didn't come from their mouths. It came from within them. My knees gave out, not from pain, from pressure. The hum wrapped around me like a vibration in the bones. The rings began to glow, dull red lines etched in dust. Then the soil at the center moved, not collapsed, lowered, slowly, evenly, like a sealed hatch opening inward. Underneath was darkness, not shadow, darkness, a cavity where earth should have been. A sound emerged from it, deeper than any hum I'd heard. I felt it in my spine before I registered it as sound. The men stopped. In perfect unison, they turned.
And walked into the trees. No gestures, no noise, just disappeared. I didn't run. I didn't move. I stepped forward. The pit was waiting. The pit wasn't deep, but it wasn't natural. The walls sloped at perfect angles. The surface was too smooth. No roots, no stones, no sign of erosion. I descended slowly, one step at a time.
The air changed, cooler, drier, but also charged, like before a storm. Not with ozone, with intent. 10 steps down, the light above began to fade, not dimmed by depth, but distorted, like something was filtering it. I reached the bottom. The floor was flat, the same dry, packed earth, but it pulsed faintly beneath my boots, not visibly, thermally, warm, then cold, then warm again, like breathing. No markings, no metal, no mechanisms, just the hum, now deeper, layered with subtle harmonics. I felt pressure building behind my eyes, not pain, alignment, like something trying to synchronize. I opened my notebook and sketched the ring structure again. 4 outer rings, 1 new. That pattern wasn't decorative, it was acoustic. An interference design. I'd seen similar models used in resonance chambers. This wasn't just a hole, it was a field, a containment geometry. Then the voice came, not out loud, not even inside my head. It came from somewhere between. Calm, even, emotionless. Do not break the field. I froze. I hadn't touched anything, hadn't crossed the center, but it knew I was here. Something was aware of me. I turned toward the incline and climbed slowly. My legs resisted, not from fatigue, but from something else, a kind of resonance, as if my body had been tuned to the environment and didn't want to leave. I pushed forward, reached the surface, and stood still. My camp was gone, not ransacked, erased, no gear, no tent, no tire tracks, no footprints, just untouched forest. But it wasn't the same. The trees were too evenly spaced, the clearing
too symmetrical, like the scene had been rebuilt, reset for someone else. I didn't speak, I didn't call out, I just stood there, notebook in hand, feeling something beneath the soil shift again. The pit hadn't revealed itself to me.
It had selected me. I spent the next 2 hours circling the clearing, trying to retrace every step. My camp was gone, completely. No tracks, no debris. Even the tire ruts from my 4x4 had vanished. The ground looked untouched, but the air wasn't right. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It was watching. I checked my notebook. The landmarks no longer lined up. Hills had shifted. Tree lines bent subtly inward. I pulled out my compass. It rotated slowly counterclockwise, a full revolution every 5 seconds, consistent, like something was pulsing beneath the forest, adjusting everything to a pattern I couldn't see. Near the edge of the clearing, I found it. A sabre tree, wide, old, its trunk hollow near the base. On the bark, a smear of black, shiny, iridescent. It looked like oil, but thicker, more solid. I knelt and used a stick to probe the edge. The stick bent, not snapped, not
scorched.
It warped, curved inward like gravity had shifted. I dropped it and stepped back. The smear pulsed once, faintly. Then it vanished. Not absorbed, not burned, just gone. The bark returned to normal. Dry, coarse, but my hands tingled. A low buzz settled in my joints. My body knew something my eyes couldn't explain. I started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but the trees felt different now, spaced with purpose. Not random. Like someone had designed the layout, not grown it. Paths bent subtly inward, pushing me towards something I wasn't ready to find. Then I saw them again. 3 humming men, standing at the tree line, motionless. I didn't move. Neither did they. The hum returned, low, layered, heavier now. I could feel it behind my teeth. The pressure built slowly, like standing too close to an unshielded subwoofer. They didn't approach. They didn't signal. They didn't need to. After 10 seconds, they vanished. Just blinked out. No sound. No footprints. The space where they stood returned to stillness, but not emptiness. They weren't guarding something. They were measuring it. And now it was measuring me. I left the clearing without looking back. The path should have taken me south toward the old road, but every turn felt unfamiliar. The trees grew closer. Together, branches drooping low, arching overhead like a rib cage. I followed what light I could, moving through the thinnest slivers of sky. After nearly an hour, I reached a stream, shallow, slow-moving, and perfectly silent. No ripple, no gurgle, not even the buzz of insects. I crouched to drink, but the water stayed still. Then I saw my reflection. It looked like me, but it didn't move when I did. It just stared, unblinking, half a second behind. Then the background warped. The trees behind my reflection twisted and looped in on themselves, repeating like a broken mirror. I stepped back. The image snapped away. The stream remained still, but I felt something shift inside me, a distortion I couldn't explain. I kept walking. The hum returned, fainter now, overlapped with a dry, clicking sound, like insect wings brushing metal. It came from below, not from the soil, but deeper, from something inside the bedrock. I didn't follow it. I was already being led. Every turn felt designed. I passed a log that had been upright yesterday. A tree with bark that looked like heat-warped plastic. Then I found the second ring. Smaller than the first, but just as precise. No pit, just the same etched circles, and in the center, a disc. Smooth, featureless. A material I couldn't identify, not metal, not stone. I didn't touch it. I stood at the edge and listened. The hum pulsed at perfect intervals. I counted them. 27 seconds apart, then 27 again, then 28. Just once, a deviation. Small, but it mattered. This wasn't
random. It was reacting. The disc warmed slightly, not heat, but a shift in pressure. Then the voice came again, low and mechanical, but not spoken. It formed between sound and thought. Field breach imminent, avatars aligned.
I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like an update, like I was being logged. I didn't run. I should have. But the voice wasn't a threat. It was procedural, like an automated system logging a shift. I circled the disc without stepping into the ring. The ground around it felt colder, though the air was still. My breath fogged faintly. I noted the time, 14:32. The hum continued, 27 seconds, again and again, until it didn't. A pause, 3 long beats, then another phrase formed, "Avatar incomplete, initiate vessel sync." I backed away. The phrase wasn't for me. It was about me. The trees leaned slightly now. I hadn't noticed before, but they were bending inward, not bowed by wind, but angled by intent. I moved fast but steady, retracing my path through the undergrowth. The landmarks were wrong again. Where the stream had been, there was only dry fern. I followed instinct more than memory until I reached another clearing. This one I hadn't seen before. In the center stood a black cube, half buried in soil. Perfect edges, seamless surface, no markings. The hum was stronger here, not louder, just more present, like it came from every direction at once. I stepped closer. The cube's surface shimmered slightly, then vibrated with a new pattern. I didn't touch it. I just let my hand hover near. The air felt thick, like standing near a running generator. The hum shifted, then broke. A final phrase emerged from the stillness. "This form is watched. Closure required." Then silence. Total, immediate, and absolute. No wind, no birds, no static. The quiet pressed in like a seal. I stood there for a long time, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The silence held. I turned and walked. I didn't go back for my gear. I didn't try to mark the trail. I just moved toward the trees that didn't lean, toward the places where the compass needle held still. The forest changed gradually. Birds returned. The air warmed. My breath no longer fogged. I didn't speak a word. I haven't returned since. But I've thought about it every day. The hum, the pit, the phrase. I wasn't a visitor. I was part of a system, not broken, not hacked, just incomplete and briefly visible before it closed around me again. He never blinked, not once the entire trip. Just stared, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. That's what Mara said when she came stumbling out of the forest 3 hours before the rest of us were due back. Her face was pale, her hoodie streaked with mud and pine needles, eyes wide and unfocused, like she'd walked through a nightmare and hadn't fully come back yet. At first, we thought she was sick, maybe a panic attack or dehydration, but once she started talking, the mood shifted. Fast. She kept repeating it. The guide never blinked, never drank water, never sat down during breaks. Said he just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue that breathed. She said he watched them, watched her, like he was memorizing something. The rangers dismissed her. Too much sun, maybe a bad reaction to some trail berries. But Mara wasn't some city girl, spooking herself over shadows. She was an ex-ski patrol medic, practical, calm under pressure, and something about the way her voice trembled when she whispered. It wasn't him. It just looked like him. Made me uneasy in a way I couldn't name. We waited for hours at the trailhead. Eventually the rest of the group returned, chatty, relaxed, completely unaware of the storm Mara had stirred up. But then came the footage. Everyone had GoPros or phones clipped to their gear. We expected to see the guide, tall, lean, flannel shirt, that weird scar on his cheek, leading them up the switchbacks. But he wasn't in a single frame, not behind them, not in front, not reflected in sunglasses or caught in a passing drone shot. Nothing. It was like he was never there. One hiker even paused, confused, saying, "Where's Liam?" before brushing it off with a laugh. That night, we re-watched every second, frame by frame, trying to find any sign of him. We didn't. What we did find was worse. At the 10-minute mark on Alex's helmet cam, as the group stopped for water, there was a flicker, just a glitch maybe, but for one frame, every head in the frame turned to the camera. Blank faces, blank eyes, except one. One pair of eyes stared straight into the lens, wide, unblinking. And I swear to God they were mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor with my laptop playing the footage over and over, pausing. At that frame, my eyes staring back at me through someone else's camera. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a reflection, a compression glitch, or just a weird trick of the angle. But every time I stopped the tape at that exact second, the eyes were there, fixed, familiar. I didn't remember being on that trail. I hadn't gone on the hike. I'd stayed behind to organize the next group, checked supplies, sent a few emails. But the face in that frame was mine. Same scar under the chin from a bike accident when I was 9. Same tired eyes I saw every morning in the mirror. And yet no one else had noticed. The others shrugged it off. Said it must have been one of the guides from another group, or maybe I'd photobombed the shot during check-in. But I hadn't. I knew that. What I didn't know, what I couldn't explain, was how that face ended up in the woods with them. I called the park office to ask about the guide. "Liam?" the woman said. "You sure that's his name?" I said yes, even described him, tall, dark flannel, scar on the cheek. She went quiet. Said she'd call me back. That was 2 days ago. No return call. Since then, I've tried to find records of previous tours, names, rosters, permits, anything that could place this Liam in the system. But there's nothing. No employee file, no schedule, no paycheck stubs. It's like he was never hired, which doesn't make sense because he'd been leading hikes for at least a year. I'd seen him, talked to him. Hell, I even shared a cigarette with him once after a long day. I thought about calling Mara, but she'd already left town. Her number didn't work anymore. Her profile vanished. The only trace she left behind was the footage, and every time I watch it, the same cold settles in my chest. Because now I'm not just watching that one frame, I'm counting. I'm looking at every hiker's face one by one, and I'm realizing something I hadn't seen before. None of them blinked, not once. By the end of the week, I couldn't pretend it was just a glitch. I started checking old rosters, trying to trace the names of anyone who'd gone on Liam's hikes. The deeper I looked, the stranger it got. Several of the names didn't appear anywhere else. No social media, no emergency contact forms, no booking records, just handwritten sign-in sheets, all in the same blocky print. At first I thought it was a clerical error. Maybe someone was forging forms to cover missing data. But the signatures weren't just similar, they were identical. Every loop, every cross, the exact same handwriting. I took a photo and compared it to past years. Same thing. Every single guest on Liam's tours signed in the same hand. Dozens of names. Maybe more. I called one of the listed numbers, a man named Joseph Benton, from a spring hike 3 months ago. The voice that answered sounded tired, detached. I introduced myself, asked if he'd recently done a guided tour through the Western Trails. Silence. Then a soft, flat voice. "I'm not supposed to talk to you." The line went dead. I tried again. The number had been disconnected. That night, I went to the equipment shed behind the ranger station, hoping to find old group photos. There weren't many. Just a few printouts in a dusty folder taped to the inside of a cabinet door. I held them up under the single bare bulb and scanned each one. No Liam. Not in any shot. Sometimes there was a space at the front of the group, like someone had stepped away just before the photo was taken. In one, a woman near the edge had her hand resting mid-air, palm slightly open, as if it had been resting on someone's shoulder, but there was no one there. I copied the photos and left quietly. Back in my cabin, I laid them out across the floor and turned off the lights. Then I used the same image software I'd used on the video, isolating shadows and angles. That's when I saw it. In the background of each photo, deep in the trees near the edge of the frame, were 2 eyes, the same every time, wide, empty, watching. I started seeing him outside the photos. Not in the forest, not in the daylight, but in reflections. Glass, doors, black screens, puddles after the rain, never directly, always peripheral, a shape, still and tall, with shoulders too square and a face too still. The first time was in the window of the admin building. I was walking past, half distracted, and for a split second I thought someone was behind me. When I turned, no one was there. But the reflection hadn't moved. It stayed there a moment, longer than it should have, holding my shape, until it blinked. That night, I locked every door in the cabin. It didn't help. I was woken just after 3 a.m. by a soft thud, like someone setting down a heavy boot on wood. I stayed still, listening. Another step. Then silence. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a bear sniffing around for scraps. But bears don't stop walking. They don't wait. At first light, I checked the porch. No prints, no scratch marks. Just one small smudge on the glass near the door, like someone had pressed their forehead against it. That's when I made the call. I told the park supervisor something was wrong with the Western Trails. I said we needed to pause all guided hikes until we could verify safety. He hesitated, then told me I didn't have clearance to suspend operations. I pushed harder, mentioned the missing hikers, the footage, the identical signatures. His voice changed, flat, cold. You should let this go. Then the line went dead. I knew then it wasn't just the guide, it was bigger. Someone, something was covering it. That night I checked the camera footage from the ranger station's exterior. At 3:07 a.m. the timestamp glitched. The screen flickered, and for 1 second the entire feed was washed in white. When it returned, there he was, standing just beyond the porch light. No movement, no approach, just watching. The file corrupted itself 5 seconds later. The system flagged. There's a checksum error. I copied what I could and deleted the rest. I didn't want anyone else seeing it, because when I paused the frame and looked into his face, I realized something I hadn't before. He wasn't alone. There was a second figure standing behind him. It looked just like me. I knew where I had to go, the storage room in the old visitor center. It hadn't been used in years, but I remembered hearing that some of the physical records were never digitized. Paper logs, backup rosters, maybe even incident reports no one bothered to transfer. I waited until just after dusk when the grounds were quiet and the main office lights were off. The visitor center was dark and cold. I used my phone for light, careful not to step too loud. The storage room was at the back, behind a warped wooden door that stuck in its frame. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Cardboard boxes sat stacked to the ceiling, their sides soft from moisture and time. I found the old logbooks in the second pile. Most of them were faded beyond use, but one was still readable. Thick blue binder labeled West Ridge 2021-2022. I flipped through pages until I found it. Liam's final listed hike. 7 names, no return times, no checkouts. Next to each name was a date, a signature, and then nothing. No notes, no reports, like someone had started the page and forgotten to finish. At the bottom, someone had scribbled a short sentence in a different pen. Returned alone, didn't speak. That wasn't protocol. I flipped ahead to the next week. No mention of Liam. His name stopped appearing altogether, not reassigned, just erased. I copied the list and took a photo of the page. When I stood, something shifted behind the boxes. I froze, listening. A soft scuff, then silence. I backed out slowly, keeping my light low. In the hallway I turned and saw a shadow move at the far end. Too quick. Too quiet. I left the building and didn't look back. Back in my cabin, I checked the photo I'd taken. The names were still there, but something else had appeared. In the corner of the image, reflected faintly in the gloss of the binder, was a face, pale, expressionless, watching the camera from just behind me. And though I hadn't seen him in the room, I recognized the shape. Same dark flannel, same wide stare, and behind him again was me, smiling. I stopped leaving the cabin after that. The photos, the reflections, the footage, it all pointed to one truth I didn't want to face. Whatever Liam was, he wasn't alone. And whatever followed him out of that forest had my face now. I kept the lights off at night, covered the windows,
Unplugged anything with a screen, But the quiet didn't bring peace. It brought static.
I started hearing a low hum at night, like a distant power line vibrating through my walls. It always started just after 3 and faded before dawn. At first, I thought it was my ears ringing. Then I saw the light. Not bright, just a dim flicker, like an old projector warming up. It came from behind the mirror on my dresser. I pulled it down and found a thin seam in the wall, almost invisible, like someone had pried it open once and sealed it poorly. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself standing in the trees, still, unblinking, smiling faintly. I went back through the logs, through every video I had, trying to track when the shift had started. It wasn't sudden. It crept in. People on Liam's hikes started acting strangely long before they vanished. Slight things, delayed reactions, repeating words, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. The kind of things you dismiss until you look back and realize they were never normal. I opened one of the earliest videos again, a spring hike from last year. I'd watched it before, but never closely. This time, I paused it at every blink. There were none. Not a single person in the footage blinked for the entire 47 minutes. Not once. I took a frame from the middle and ran it through facial recognition software, matching it to park records. 5 out of 7 came back, clean. The last 2 didn't register, no matches, no metadata, like the system couldn't recognize them as faces at all. I cross-checked it with the security archives, same result. Then I looked up my own profile. It wouldn't load, just a blank screen with a spinning icon. At the bottom, one line of text, file overwritten. I closed the laptop slowly. Outside the window, I saw movement, not fast, just a slow tilt of a head, my own, watching, waiting, smiling. I packed at first light, just essentials, ID, cash, a burner phone, the photos I couldn't explain. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I didn't trust the station. I didn't trust the roads either. I drove south, sticking to side routes and old backways, avoiding gas stations with cameras. I kept the mirror angled just low enough to see the back seat without locking eyes with my own reflection. I drove for 9 hours, no music, no stops. I didn't even feel tired, just wired, like my body knew sleep wasn't safe anymore. By dusk I reached the town where Mara's emergency contact used to live. The number she listed when she checked in on her last hike. A cousin. I knocked on the door of a small yellow house. A woman answered. Tired eyes, hair pulled back, no makeup. I asked if she knew Mara. She froze, then nodded. You're not the first, she said. They always come after someone disappears. I asked what she meant. She didn't answer, just let me inside. Her kitchen table was covered in files, printouts, copies of missing persons reports. All the same story. People went on those hikes. They never came back. Or they did, but they weren't the same. One came back to his parents, she said. Same face, same voice. But he didn't know their dog had died, didn't remember his own handwriting. She showed me a photo. Him standing in the yard. The angle was off, slightly tilted. His eyes weren't quite level. I showed her the binder photo with the reflection. She didn't flinch. just pointed to the corner. "That's not a reflection," she said. "It's a record." She didn't explain, just said the word like it meant something. A type, a classification, a stage. I asked how many there were. She stared at me for a long time before answering. "You have 4 days," she said. "From first contact."
"After that, you're not you anymore." I asked how she knew. She looked me dead in the eye. Because Mara only had 3. I felt the weight of every hour. I stood to leave. She didn't stop me. Just handed me a folded note with an address.
And a warning. Don't look at your reflection. Don't sleep near glass. And whatever you do, don't answer if you hear yourself calling from the dark.